You're listening to ProdCast, the personal productivity podcast from CRM Audio. This episode is sponsored by KingswaySoft. KingswaySoft is a leading integration solution provider offering software solutions that make data integrations affordable and painlessly easy. Thousands of enterprise clients from over 70 countries and regions rely on KingswaySoft to integrate data with various business systems in order to drive their business efficiency and fully leverage their information assets. Check out their version 6 release of the SSIS Productivity Pack, featuring 7 new components, including support for Azure Blob Storage, Google Sheets, and a new data profiler transformation component. KingswaySoft is a leading provider of Microsoft Dynamics integration software, including Dynamics 365, CRM, AX, Nav, GP, SL, as well as many other applications. We thank KingswaySoft for sponsoring ProdCast, the personal productivity podcast from CRM Audio. Well, Matthew, welcome to ProdCast. You look different. Did something change?
Well, I mean, it depends the scale you're talking. I don't feel like I've changed as a person, but I am right in the throes of changing jobs, actually. I took a role with a new company.
Oh, is it a big company?
It is, in fact, one of the larger ones. You may have heard of it. I actually took a job with Microsoft.
Oh, cool. What are you going to be doing, Matthew?
Well, so I've been in the Microsoft Dynamics consulting channel for about the last 8 years, and it was time to move over to the vendor side. So I'll be a technology solutions professional with the Microsoft team and in a national role. Pretty excited about it.
Awesome. So how do you approach productivity when you're changing jobs? Because that kind of can shake everything up for you.
Absolutely. So I try to actually embrace that opportunity to be able to shake things up. So for me, whether it's making a big change to a new organization or just changing to a different role within an existing company, I really tried to embrace that as a way to take a fresh start at some of the things that I've been doing. So as an example, I do a pretty rigorous kind of time planning session for myself of how am I going to spend the time putting it into different buckets over the course of the coming week, and then I track what I plan versus what actuals are and that kind of thing. So that the process itself doesn't change, but my method of how am I tracking it, what is the actual physical Excel workbook where I track all that information and some of the coding that I do and writing all the formulas and that kind of thing, I go back to square one. Just as a way to be able to say, hey, I know I did this before. I've been doing a lot of things just because it's the way that I have built it out, and I've been doing it this way now for, in some cases up to a few years. But it's that opportunity to go back and say, why am I doing it this way? Or why am I, kind of grouping things into these buckets that I have? Why have those not changed over the course of the last couple of years?
Right. So when you change jobs, was it hard to mix or to separate out the professional stuff that you wiped out and your personal stuff, or do you intentionally keep things segmented, personal notes versus your business notes, or personal contacts versus business contacts?
Yeah, so in anticipation of these kind of things, I do try to keep a bit of a wall between some of the personal stuff as well as the professional, but I'm not perfect with that. Email contact lists and that kind of thing I'm pretty good with. I just add it into my phone and then copy it across into both my Gmail contacts as well as my Outlook contacts, and I keep those address books in sync, so I don't have to do some mass export of names and that kind of thing. On the side of like a OneNote, OneDrive, and those sorts of things, boy, for any of the stuff that I'm leaving, I'm kind of happy to transition that off to whoever that new owner is going to be and start with a clean slate. But for personal things like, I do have a personal OneDrive that I've had since, kind of the outset of that being a service available online. So there are a number of things there, including, the show notebook for ProdCast, that I keep in that personal side to make these transitions pretty easy.
Okay. Do you keep an archive folder of, say, work you had done, or say you did some design for something? Not saying keeping company secrets from previous employers, but I mean just stuff, artifacts of things you worked at that you might worked on that you might not want to look back on. Do you keep an archive of your former company stuff so you can keep some of that and keep that kind of in a time capsule somewhere?
Yeah, I'm always a little bit concerned and maybe overly cautious of making sure that there's no question that I'm not trying to keep any kind of company secrets or anything like that. But I do just kind of as I'm doing it, I try to keep a log of things that are almost like a portfolio that I can look back at, kind of remember the journey that I went through as I was building some of those things out, and then I can see the actual product of that. Now, a couple of things that I do for that is I've mentioned before on ProdCast how I have, pretty well established journaling habit at this point. So a lot of those things, I like having an actual thing that I can reference if I trigger that memory when I'm looking at, January 31st from, writing my journal entry, and then want to see something that I saw had been written about a couple of years back, and being able to go, kind of pluck through some of those things. There was once a time, I'm a little bit beyond this, but I used to actually print out emails that I thought were particularly noteworthy, whether for good or for bad.
Yes.
Though that kind of turned into something that was therapeutic at times, where if there was an email that really frustrated me, I would print it out so I could then crumple it up and throw it away.
Wow. Yeah, that just brings to mind a manager that I had, and she would print out like every email she had, and she had reams and reams of paper sitting around with all the emails she had ever done. I don't know why.
Yeah. Well, I never quite had that deep of an affliction with that, but definitely having a few of those, especially where I thought it really showed. It captured a point in time or something that I wanted to be able to look back at. The email that came in with the first really big purchase order I got in when I was in sales. I printed that out. I noted the time, and that was kind of a cool thing to have with me. And those are the kind of things that I'm looking at. Getting feedback, kudos from a different thing, from different projects that I've worked on, or even feedback from presenter scores and session scores at different conferences that I present at. Those types of things I really like to kind of keep around, just to prove to myself that I might know what I'm talking about occasionally.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess what you're talking about is stuff that you don't actually have to change jobs to go through that process. You can question your organization or the way that you're collating your notebooks or what you're keeping, and have a fresh start without actually having to change roles as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm kind of doing that with my OneNote right now. I'm kind of going minimalist with OneNote now, and rather than having a bunch of different notebooks, I'm trying to get it down to under 10 probably. With I need to have a podcast one, which have a podcast one, but then I need a personal one, and I've started using OneNote for my bookmarks for websites, because I switch browsers a lot, and I haven't found a good bookmark syncing tool or a good way to organize them in there. But I'm liking putting them just in a OneNote on a links page, and then I can search it and find it, in wherever I am. So I like that, and just things I read. So kind of a personal notebook, but then I'm going to a more, instead of one for each customer, I'm going to try one notebook and then have a tab for each customer that I'm working with the notes in there. Trying to use it more, because I think that's really more what it's designed to be like, rather than having, I was almost treating a OneNote like a Word document and creating a new one each time I needed one, and it just gets unwieldy.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on some of that, and what I will say is, just going through a transition, I've been keeping my OneNote notebooks each separate. So each client or each prospect had its own separate notebook, and for transition time, that actually made things a little bit easier because, different things were going to transition off to different people. So I could, kind of have the entire notebook that was going to somebody rather than trying to export a section or, we're everywhere I go, we've used Office 365 and OneDrive for Business since that's been an option. So it's, really just kind of giving the right access and ownership to somebody new for those as I exit stage right.
Yeah, you're right. I think there's the big plus of using separate is you could share it with other people. So if it is something you have to share, but you can also, if you start with them combined and you need to split it off into its own notebook, that's not that hard to do either.
Yeah. Well, and it does bring up one of those things when you start looking at how things like a OneNote notebook that's possibly sitting out on OneDrive or OneDrive for Business, and what's the right approach for an individual using that, and when you start sharing, when should it really be, say, on a SharePoint site versus in a OneDrive? And that's probably an entire topic unto itself that we could go into. But the more people that are going to be collaborating, that should probably be its own notebook, but maybe on a SharePoint site, or some sort of a team site to be able to coordinate around that a little more easily.
Right. And that's where I find, too, a lot of my notes, I don't actually ever look back at them. It's kind of like the art of taking notes is in the taking of the note for me rather than the reading the note afterwards. And I've actually started to use a lot more handwritten notes inside of OneNote as well, using my device with the stylus. One of the things I've tried to do after the beginning of the year, I've always thought, I have pretty bad handwriting, which I do have not great handwriting, but I've made it my goal to try and improve my handwriting and actually been reading up about handwriting, and I found that I was holding the pen incorrectly. The recommended way is to hold it more between your thumb and index finger. I was more leaning against the knuckle of my middle finger. And I found by doing that, my handwriting improved, my speeds improved, and now I'm just trying to practice handwriting more just wherever I can. So I've started, even in OneNote, handwriting my notes. And the cool thing I found, here's something I found on the Surface. If you handwrite a note and then you select it with the lasso selection tool, copy it and paste it somewhere else, it will paste the OCR text into where you're pasting it.
Oh, that's really cool. I didn't know that one.
Yeah. So I thought that was kind of a little thing I learned in the process. So I find something about handwriting the notes, which I think you mentioned with the journaling, doing a handwritten journal versus a electronic journal, is I find there's a lot of benefit from handwriting the note in that just you seem to get more out of it and you seem to remember more. Something about handwriting and memory, there's this weird connection that's not there for typing.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the handwriting, I have, on my last 3 work machines, I've insisted on having a pen on the touch screen where I could take notes with it. And I find that, Windows has really improved in some of the different ways that you can get that in there. It's great for both, just popping up a OneNote and putting that full screen and be able to write things and be very present in the moment. People don't feel like you're hiding behind a keyboard when you have the Surface out and they can see you, handwriting with a pen. But also at the same time, there are things like I'll use Windows Ink quite a bit, especially if I'm doing any kind of gathering feedback or prototyping on what something should look like. I'll use Windows Ink to grab a screen capture of what a current state is or something similar is or some ideas they've had in the past, and then kind of marking that up and having that as something that can be emailed out or dropped into a OneNote, those sorts of things. So I found the pen to be a really effective tool at being able to help make myself more productive using a computer.
So are you saying within Windows 10, I know they've got the ink area where For example, on the Surface 4, you can click the pen and it'll take a snapshot of your screen, and then you can start inking on it. Is that what you're talking about?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I found that's can be effective in certain types of presentations. I've seen people actually use that in a demo where they're going along, moving on the screen, and then when people are talking about it, maybe it's a design session, they click the button, take a screenshot, so it still looks like they're on the screen. Then they start writing on it, like move this field over here, make this wider. That could be really really an effective tool.
Yeah, and it is, especially if you have anybody who's remote for a meeting. A lot of times I like getting up and using a whiteboard, but unless you have some sort of a smart board, that can make it really obscure for the people who are on the phone remote. They may even have a video connection, but there's very little chance that they can see what's on a whiteboard. Versus if you have a screen share going, I haven't really been that impressed with the whiteboard capabilities within Skype for Business, but screen sharing and having either a fresh OneNote open or doing that screen capture and inking over the top, I found that to be pretty effective in having those remote people be engaged.
Yeah, and on that, I think, and I don't even know if the whiteboard part of Skype is there anymore. I actually looked for it a while ago and I couldn't find it. But Microsoft does have a new tool called Microsoft Whiteboard that's in preview right now that you can sign up for. And it's the idea that having remote people connect in and sharing the common whiteboard. So you might want to check that out too. Especially now since you work for Microsoft.
Yeah, now, I mean, because I'm there, I have to know everything that's going on at Microsoft all the time. That's the privilege, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So have you done any productivity-related reading lately?
So as far as productivity-related reading, there was an article that I caught in an issue of Fast Company. I was catching up. This is actually from back in December, but they went through and asked a handful of questions to about 20 different highly productive people, and you can agree or disagree whether they're highly productive or not. Very, very kind of structured types of questions to see if there are any commonalities that are out there. So I thought what we could do is perhaps go through some of these, give our own questions, and then do a comparison to some of what the productivity experts had to say.
Yeah, I think I read that article, and most of the articles in Fast Company start with why you should get up at 4:00 in the morning or something like that. So I don't know if I'd follow all the recommendations of Fast Company magazine, but it's interesting to look at what other people said. It seems, and this is oversimplifying it, but it seems like there's two general schools of thought: the highly regimented, do everything the same every day, and some people that are a little bit more flexible. So, is that kind of what you saw in the article?
Well, I mean, so that's mostly true. They did end up breaking out kind of four common archetypes, if you will, though one of the archetypes covers 50 to 60% of the population.
Right.
Which I don't. That one on its own, they said 50 to 55% of the population actually, who are get it done extroverts who tend to oversleep. I don't think there's any possibility of 50 to 55 being anywhere close to a reality. That's got to be a skewed sample.
Yeah, I don't think they were interviewing very many real people. So what are the questions?
Okay, first question, Joel. What time do you wake up? Is it 4:30?
Now, I usually wake up at 5:30 in the morning, and that's just my natural time to wake up. Maybe 6. But I never set an alarm clock unless I have a flight at 3 a.m. And I've always been this way, even when I was a kid or a teenager. I was never one to be, just lay in bed sleeping. I'm like, wake up, I'm fully awake. It's no halfway between. I don't take a long time to go to sleep. I fall asleep right away, and then when I wake up, I'm up. And the interesting thing is, I set an alarm clock, I always wake up 5 minutes before it goes off, whatever time it is. It's the weirdest thing.
Well, that's. I think a lot of people, perhaps out there listening, are going to be jealous about hearing that one. I think a lot of people, it's the 5-minute snooze button that they're thinking about with any time they set their alarm clock.
Although I did get an alarm clock app, and this is kind of funny. I don't know if you've seen the Carrot apps like Carrot Weather. There's kind of a weather app that has an attitude, and they have an alarm clock app that is really kind of crazy. And if you snooze it, it starts yelling at you.
Okay.
So if you have trouble getting out of bed and hitting the snooze button, you might want to get the Carrot app. It's also good for people that are like groggy in the morning, and because it'll give you tasks. It'll be like feed the robots, and you got to like slide the thing across the screen. It's pretty funny.
Right on. Well, in the spirit of sharing my answer on that one, I'm usually up between 6:30 and 7 most mornings, at least if I wake up naturally. Though I will say I've got a 2-year-old at home right now, so sometimes I'm up much, much earlier, not by choice and not because I'm waking up naturally.
Yeah, kids will ruin your sleep, that's for sure.
All right, so next question, Joel. What's the first thing that you do after you wake up?
You know, what I'm going to say is probably the wrong answer. And I know that there's people say, don't check email, don't work, exercise, do inspirational reading, whatever. I actually do a checkup shortly after I wake up. But I think I have a good reason for it. It's because I've found that, in my career, a lot of people dread Mondays or dread 8 a.m. because there's surprises coming. There's things might blow up. Maybe something blew up. And for me, I need to take my kids to school, which means I don't usually get to the office until 9. So what I do is before my kids wake up, and I try and control this, so it's not like I have trying to do 2 hours of work, but a very intense, focused time of looking at my calendar, making sure I'm ready for my meetings for the day, and then I'm mentally prepared for what's coming up, kind of the pre-check. Glance at email, clear out stuff that's come out, delete any junk that's come in, so I'm prepared and I'm not coming into a surprise. And that way, when I take my kids to school and don't get to work a little bit later than some of my colleagues are, I'm not behind at that point. So it's proactively making sure that I'm ready for that. Then I do fun reading, inspirational reading, whatever, have breakfast, make sure my son gets out of bed when he's supposed to get out of bed. It's funny because my wife's the nice waker-upper where she's like, okay, Jack, it's time to get up in the morning. I'm the get your feet on the floor. It's time to go to school. And my approach is more effective. So, the lesson I've learned is that the kids' feet are not touching the floor. They're not really awake. But the kids' feet are touching the floor. They wake up.
Well, there you go. I'll have to file that one away for a future point in time.
Yeah, call me in 3 years. I got a bunch of good tips about getting your kids out of bed.
Perfect. Yeah, for me, that first thing that I'm doing every day is I get out for a walk with the dog. It's a great way to get the blood flowing, and even in these bitter cold Minnesota winters, sometimes I get that opportunity to get outside, get a little blood flowing.
Yeah, I will, and again, I will probably a couple of times a week do that. I have found that when I do that, I have more energy through the day. So I am a fan of that. I guess it depends on how busy I am. I also like to do that because I'm usually working on an audiobook, and that gives me more time to make progress in that audiobook too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me it's either podcasts or nothing. Sometimes actually just listening to the world around me is kind of nice for those. If I always have something going into my ears while I'm on those walks, I find I'm like less patient with the dog, which is surprising to me when I kind of catch myself in the middle of that. Yeah,
it makes sense. And you gotta watch out so you can hear the snowplow coming too.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so kind of continuing through this, I'm going to jump forward to the nightly routine. So the last things you're doing before bed.
Last things I do before bed are brush my teeth. um, there again, I have to fight myself not to work after hours or get caught up in emails and that type of thing. I usually do glance at my calendar, not right before bed, but again, I want to make sure that I'm not forgetting anything or I'm mentally prepared. If I do have things coming into my mind, like, oh, I forgot to do this, oh, I forgot to do that, I will add them to my task list. I have been using Microsoft To Do more than I was before. And I think I discovered how it's meant to be used. And that is, it's almost up to Wunderlist. The two things that are missing are ability to assign things to people that, other people that are like your wife and stuff, which I wasn't really doing, and file attachments. But other than that, it's got everything else I used in Wunderlist. But the thing it's got that Wunderlist didn't is the My Day feature, which is a screen that I can then select the tasks that are on my list and say, I'm going to do this, add this to my day. So it has a nice daily planning thing that I like a lot. And so I can go through, I've got my tasks there. I can see, what's done, what needs to be done, and can prioritize and say for my next day, these are the most important things on my list that I need to do.
Got it. Very cool. So for me on the same question, I do a calendar check just to make sure that I have an idea of what my day is going to have the next day. But after that, I pull out a book, like an actual either physical book that I have in my hands, or an ebook occasionally. But it's usually I have enough actual physical books around that it's kind of nice to have a non-digital device in my hand. And I'll read for between 30 and 45 minutes. Usually by then I am drowsy enough. It's time to flip out the light and go fall asleep.
Yeah, I do. I do reading usually for half an hour before. Now I'm kind of crazy in that it's hard for me to focus on more than one book at a time. So if I'm listening to an audiobook, it's hard for me to also read another book. It's when I do that, the things kind of run together, which makes some funny combinations. So so if I do have an audiobook I'm working on, I will sometimes listen to the audiobook, because again, I like to feel like I'm making progress faster. I hate having multiple books that I'm going through at the same time, feeling like I'm just crawling through them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, So I usually have either one or two books going at the same time, but if it's two, one's fiction, the other's nonfiction, so they don't overlap. It's just different for me. Different enough.
Right. But if you have two fiction books, the stories can run together.
Yeah, that's no fun. That what that tells me is I probably should be quitting on one of those books because I don't actually like it.
Yeah, so why is the lawyer in Narnia? I don't understand. Okay. Any other questions?
I think that's a good enough cross-section of them for me. I feel like, netting that against some of the things that we saw here, these highly productive people were anywhere in that 5:30 to call it 7:30 range for where they were getting up. First things that they're doing, surprising number of people checking their iPhone. You aren't alone on that one. And as far as the final things to do before bed, turning off screens is actually quite a popular one. So we're falling in line there.
Yeah, that's a good idea, because if you don't, and I have increasingly been forcing myself to charge my phone in a different part of the house. I find interesting that action will make me sleep longer in the morning. And for me, most people need to fight to get out of bed. I'm kind of the opposite. I need to fight myself to make myself get a little bit more sleep, because I know that if I don't, I'll just get up and start doing stuff, and I've got so many things in my brain I want to do, and I got to get that podcast episode ready to publish and all this stuff. So if I have my phone somewhere else, making it just a little bit more effort to get the phone, even if it's just right outside your room, then that can be that can be helpful. But of course, then that means I can't use my Carrot alarm clock app that will yell at me. So
yeah, unless they let you do it through Alexa.
Exactly. Well, Matthew, I hope your new role goes well. I know you're trying to still figure out where everything is and who's who and what's what. But I think you're going to do great there. And say hi to our former colleague, which is now your colleague, Scott Sewell. So yes, I can say your colleague Scott Sewell, not my colleague Scott Sewell.
Our cohort, either way.
This has been ProdCast, the personal productivity podcast from CRM Audio with Matthew C. Anderson and Joel Lindstrom. You can follow Matthew at his blog, connectingthedata.com, or on Twitter at MC Anderson. You can follow Joel Lindstrom on Twitter at Joel Lindstrom. You can subscribe to the CRM Audio network of podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, or any place else that offers fine podcasts. This podcast is a production of Dynamic Podcasts, LLC.